We're back for another exciting topic.
Holiday edition.
Yes. So we're talking about sales friction, or why are you making it so hard for people to buy something from you? And I would say this is probably a near universal problem in biotech. There's maybe one company in 1,000 that really gets this right. Not everybody gets it wrong in every possible way, but almost everybody is doing some aspect of this wrong, where you basically throw up completely needless roadblocks that make it difficult for someone to figure out what you sell, what it costs, how to buy it, and whether or not it's right for them. And people's response is typically not to get curious and dig deeper. Their response is usually to abandon it and go somewhere else where it's not as hard to figure out how to buy it.
Right. Yeah. And so these issues, I think, tend to present in very small, discernible ways. But I think the reason they happen is really just it's more of a systemic cause. And the cause tends to be, from my view, that companies aren't focused on matching their selling process to the customer's buying process. They're trying to figure out the selling process without a lot of consideration or without much consideration given to what the customer's preferences are and what their needs are in terms of how they buy.
Right. And on the marketing side, what I've seen repeatedly are people justifying doing the dumbest things on the argument that we want to force them to fill in the blank. We want to force them to give us their email address. We want to make them get curious about the product so they'll dig deeper. And that's why we're being so obscure with what we sell. And
Right.
The deal is that you are not going to get people to behave differently than they normally are going to behave. What you'll get them to do is to go somewhere else so that they find someone who will let them behave the way they normally behave.
Yeah, I think it's hard to get into this topic without getting into really some specific examples that annoy, I think, everybody that encounters them. And so we're going to probably weave back and forth between what is happening in the customer's face and then what's causing it. What can you do differently? And how can you avoid doing it? So the gated content, I think, is probably the biggest one that I see in biotech across the board. Companies work hard to produce content, to think about the effort that companies take to generate data so they can write a white paper so that they can then put it on their website or maybe present it at a conference. But then rather than letting distribution happen organically and let the content get maximum exposure, they want you to provide at least an email address, often a name, where are you from, so we can assign the right sales territory, and what's your phone number, because we don't trust that you're actually going to answer your email. And oh, by the way, are you a decision maker or are you not a decision maker? And it ends up,
and what's the range of your purchase authority?
Right. It ends up being this game of 20 questions simply to read a poster or a white paper that by itself isn't really going to advance the selling process that much.
Right.
And then so many times, if you go back to that company or that vendor for a second piece of content, you have to do the whole thing again. But you're really, on the one hand, all these resources and time go into producing the content, and then you're basically crippling your distribution by gating it in a way that at the end of the day is not going to help you sell more product.
Yeah. And the other thing that people, I think, focus too much on is, I want this. Meaning you're the marketing person that's setting all this up. I want this from the customer, or the sales organization saying, we need the customer fully qualified before we're going to spend any time talking to them. And so you get the 20 field form that no one fills out. And what they don't understand is that you really have to step outside yourself and go through the screen and think about it from the standpoint of the person on the other side reading this. And the deal with gated content is that this is a financial transaction. Just because you're not paying money for it, it doesn't make it any less of a financialized transaction, because you're basically giving up privacy. You're putting yourself at future risk of some used car salesman that won't quit calling you. And what you're essentially asking people to do is to prepay for a good with no option for a refund, because once you've given it up, you can't ungive it up. So they want you to prepay for a secret good that you cannot examine or know what it is in a way where there's no opportunity for a refund. And that is the definition of a really bad deal. And a much better deal is just ungate it, put it up there. And then at the bottom of the content, give them the option. If you like this and you want more, give us your email address, and we can email you a steady cadence of similar material. And the deal there is that you've given them value up front and you're promising them future value. So now it's a very fundamentally different transaction and a very different transactional psychology. And the people who are going to give you the email address are the people who are genuinely interested in that particular topic, that particular category of content. So you're going to get fewer number of people, much higher quality, far more likely to buy if you do it this way. And that's probably the single most powerful thing you can do to change your website today, other than one other exception that we'll talk about in a second. But
right. So before we get to that one, let's take this a step further. So some companies have tried to solve the whole sort of qualification hamster wheel by, instead of doing the 20 questions on the web form, you just provide your email address, and then we'll assign a sales development representative or a business development representative to follow up with high level of diligence to obtain all that other qualification information. And to me, I've worked with BDRs and SDRs, and I think that actually this is not a slight against them so much as it's a slight against the position that they're put in. Because when we're talking about qualification, and let's say you have a hot white paper, I've never seen a hot white paper, but let's say one exists and you're getting a lot of leads off of it or a lot of contacts off of it. The idea is you have this BDR or SDR that's working through, maybe they're doing research on LinkedIn on the people, or maybe they're contacting them for follow-up information. But the purpose of all those contacts is to support your selling process, not to support the customer's buying process. And so the engagement, once that email address is given and the white paper is downloaded, the interactions that potential customer has with your company don't advance their needs, and in fact, probably retard them by the amount of time or effort that it takes up to respond or to mark as spam or whatever else is going on.
And the other thing there too is that if you have a large number of prospects coming in, there'll be a wide distribution of buying interest. You're going to have some people who already know they want to buy. Maybe they bought from you in the past when they were in a different lab, or they work with a trusted colleague who's said, this is the thing to buy. They're ready to shove you their credit card right now. Don't slow them down. At the same time, there are people that need just one question answered or two questions answered. And then there are other people that are mildly interested, may or may not buy. But the problem is you don't know when you're looking at a single individual name, you don't know where they fit on that spectrum. And what you're doing by overqualifying up front is that you're basically driving away the people who are the most likely to buy immediately. And you're stringing along the people who are the least likely to buy. It's really an inverse Darwinism, the survival of the unfittest that come out of this process. And so it's important to be able to give people the chance to make a decision early, because it helps everybody. And most of those people that aren't qualified, aren't fully ready, they're not going to buy anyway. You're not making them more likely to buy by pushing them through this process.
Right. Yeah, there's nothing I disagree with there. I think the solution, if you have a BDR or an SDR team, can be quite powerful, but I think if you're going to employ a tool like that, you want to make sure it's going to support the customer's buying process. Okay, so these people should be armed with, okay, what are the most common questions that people have? And can we proactively try to resolve some of those? Is there a particular type of customer that we think is worth an outbound follow-up to try to engage them further? At what point do we trigger a more qualified or more experienced salesperson to engage with this particular prospect? Those are all questions that should be answered. And you don't want to have to figure this out empirically over your first 1,000 prospects. SDRs can be a powerful addition, but gosh, you have to really use it with caution.
Right. And the way to flip your thinking on an SDR is, are they there to make the selling process easier, meaning highly pre-qualify the customer before we quote, waste a sales rep's time, or to make the buying process easier? And every salesperson who's ever sold knows that for any given product, there is a list of 20 questions that they get asked every single time. And that the entire front end of that sales process is basically answering 8 out of that list of 20. It's the same stuff over and over again. And again, people aren't asking the questions for any reason other than the fact that they don't know the answer. And so one area where an SDR can be very valuable is to basically take that load off of your more experienced sales reps by giving that information, answering all of those basic questions. But again, this is flipping. This is the SDR not as a function to make the sales process go smoother, but it's an SDR to make the buying process go smoother. And in the end, it also makes the selling process go smoother, because by the time it's in the hands of an experienced rep, you're now down to the really hard questions and down to the details of how you're going to close the transaction, rather than just the perfunctory front end of answering the same question over and over again.
So the same question that is going to get asked over and over again, if I had to predict what it was, it's going to be, how much does this cost?
Right.
Should the SDR answer that question?
I think absolutely, because if it's not in your budget, why consume more of the organization's resources on someone who is never going to buy? And most people are not buying on pricing alone. If they are buying on pricing, it's probably not your ideal customer. It would indicate that they're perceiving your product as so commoditized that there's nothing that will move their buying decision other than, are you 15 cents less than the competitor? And if that's the case, either you really have a commodity and there are different approaches to dealing with that, or your entire marketing effort is a complete failure because you have failed to establish any sort of value proposition and any sort of differentiation in your product. And as a result, people are entering the sales process with this notion that what you're selling is a complete replaceable commodity that they could get from anywhere. And all they want to know is it $520 or $521. And they'll go with the $520 version.
For any commodity product, though, imagine if you're buying a loaf of bread and you've got like store brand bread, $3, and then you have Pepperidge Farm, but you can't see the price until you get to the checkout counter. Who's going to waste their time with that? Like, it's a lot. If you know that your product is a commodity product, they shouldn't even have to be talking to the SDR to get the price. Like, they should have access to that price right on the website.
Right. And even if it's bespoke pricing, I worked in the oligo and the peptide business and the sequencing business, and a lot of that's very bespoke pricing. You can still put a range. You can still give people a sense. But if they're going to not buy from you because of pricing, either your production process is so flawed that you're not a viable business. In other words, if your cost of production is so high that it is above other people's list price, you're not going to make it. Or marketing has completely failed you and have failed to establish any reason to buy the product other than it's the cheapest. And I saw a website recently, just yesterday actually, where at the very top, bold banner, we sell substantially less than, I think it was Thermo and Abcam. And you look and it was like 50% price. And it's like, why do you have such low pricing power? It's something upstream is wrong if you have to drop your price to 50% of the market leader in order to get a sale. And it's really bad if that's the very top of the front of the homepage of the website. That's what you're going to lead with. We are insanely cheap. Then you start to come across like a used car salesman.
Right. I guess there's a couple. Sometimes you do have that economy of scale, but what you alluded to is the question of why is this so much less expensive? That's an opportunity to delve into. Okay, why is it? Have we figured out something more efficient? Do we do a much higher volume of this than our competitors? And so therefore we're able to give you much better pricing. Like, what is it that we do this? And there might be a good justification for having that kind of pricing structure in place. That's a pricing strategy question, which is a little bit different from how and should you communicate your price to the customers. My philosophy is early and often. If a customer ever asks me as a salesperson for a price and I don't give it to them, I would have a pretty low expectation of having future profitable conversations with that person. And it's a trust thing too. If you I've had this happen more than once too, where you go to a vendor's website and you click on their pricing link, and instead of pricing, you get hit with this, oh, contact a sales representative. And oh, by the way, fill out these 20 required fields. And we still won't tell you the price until you have a call with us and you sit through our PowerPoint presentation. At the end, we'll tell you that we're 10 times higher than what you thought it was going to be when you first filled out that form.
And the other question, and this is really a topic for a different one of these sessions, but if you have a scale of production advantage that allows you to produce at a lower price, or you have some unique technological advantage that allows you to manufacture at a lower price, why are you using that pricing power to sell at a cut rate price? It almost never makes sense. If you can make it for half of your competitors, sell it for what your competitors sell it for, and bank the profits. Don't give the profits away by just needlessly discounting.
I'm gonna take your invitation for a detour here, and I'll explain the situation where I think that could apply.
There is an exception to that, but go ahead.
So I think the exception is if you have a service, let's say it's next generation sequencing in the early days, and it's just everybody is pricing it like you have some market leaders and they own most of the market, and everybody is pricing that service at pretty much where it needs to be. And you come along, and you're like, okay, hey, I've got a new machine or a new method that's going to make this 5 times less expensive to do. You have a lot of demand in the market that would like that service, but they can't afford it, or it doesn't make economic sense to them at the price that is the market clearing price of that service. You come in as a new entrant and you're able to capture actually a lot more volume with that because of the elasticity of that price.
Right. If you're on a highly steep price elasticity curve, then it makes sense to do that.
Yeah.
And I've lived in that world. I was in the Wild West days of the early oligo business, where every time the unit price dropped by half, the market demand went up by more than a factor of 10. And so there, everyone was in this sort of arms race to manufacture at a lower price because we could expand the demand for the product at rates that were just exponential to the rate at which we were lowering price. But very few people are in that world. Almost everyone is in a very different world where there isn't this sort of potential explosive growth if you can ride the price elasticity curve down. Most people are in a lot more stable, flat price elasticity environment. But to move on to my favorite topic of the biggest mistake people make, we probably should have put this earlier in, is you go to the website, you look at the top of the homepage, and you have no freaking clue what they sell or who they sell it to. You have such brilliant things as "we advance researchers making a better world for tomorrow," and I didn't come here to buy a better world, and I'm the one advancing my own research. I just need some aptamers here.
Yeah. So I think one very specific thing that I see here is if you can't tell if it's a product or a service. I have certainly encountered a number of vendors in the biotech space, especially like assay related technologies, where they have great technical pages on their assay and you're looking at them, you're like, okay, I understand the science, but is this something where I have to pay you to do it for me, or will you sell me the products for me to do it myself? And again, that's such basic information. It should be presented right up front.
And another big one is this an RUO product? You present it very aspirationally as a clinical diagnostic. Unfortunately, you don't have any regulatory approval, which means you cannot, poke a patient with this thing. The best you can do is maybe some specialized trials or poke a mouse with it. And what you'll see is companies, and I've worked with companies that have done this, where they make the reference to the fact that it's an RUO product in 6-point font, way down in the footer at the bottom, in light gray text that is hard to read. And this is an important thing. You can't, even though you're going to be, a diagnostic in the clinical environment, you're not there yet. So don't talk about what you don't have to sell. Talk about what you do have to sell, which is an RUO product. And so that's the other thing, is you end up getting a lot of people drop into the sales process because they don't understand that what you're spending all your time talking about isn't something you have available to sell. So only talk about the stuff that is available to sell or will soon be available to sell. But the other thing is just make it clear. There's not there is hardly one site in 1,000 in biotech that I run across where I know instantly from the top banner of the homepage what you sell and who you sell it to, and then what are the limitations. Part of those limitations is, are you sending me a kit? Do I have to send you samples? Do I have to go out and buy a NovaSeq before I can use that kit you send me? Tell me the limitations so I have some way to put you within a framework of my other available options. Because I'm just not going to dig that hard to find out this information, especially if there's someone else who is upfront with this information. And that's the other thing here, is that so few people do this. If you simply speak in a clear voice about what you're selling, you will be so unique that you will have a competitive advantage over everyone else. Because again, people aren't looking for the best. They're looking for whatever satisfies their need that involves the least amount of effort on their part. So no one is going to deep research their 250 options in the market and carefully evaluate the best one, because they know they can't. What they're going to do is they're going to look until they find one that's good enough, and then they're going to quit and they're going to buy that one.
But wait, what if most of our customers are toxicologists and we put that on our headline or in our website banner? This product is for used and loved by toxicologists. Aren't we going to scare away the one or two cardiologists that come to the website and want to buy it from us?
Yeah, but you'll probably bore and drive away far more toxicologists if you don't mention that, if they have to dig and paw through your website to find out that's what this is for. The deal is that pick an ICP, pick a target market that is big enough that you're going to be profitable, and focus on that. And make it as easy for those people to understand what you sell and as easy for those people to buy as possible. If someone comes along that doesn't fit that profile and they're shoving a credit card at you, don't turn them down. But you just are not going to make enough of those peripheral sales to be worth confusing the environment for everyone that is in your primary customer base. Yeah,
if only there was a way we could figure out what customers thought about us without having to guess all the time. Wouldn't that just make the world so much easier for the marketing department?
Yeah, but we certainly can't do anything crazy to go ask them.
And again, market research isn't just about the features and specifications of the product. It's about, how do customers want to buy the product after they've bought it? What frustrations did they have that they encountered that you could make go away for the next customer?
So I'll throw one last issue that I see is just universal in not just biotech, but it tends to be an issue with tech companies in general, which is, I'm at some random point in the website and you finally convince me and I'm ready to have a conversation. Only I have no idea how to reach you. None, zero. And I cannot tell you how many websites that I see where there is no contact information on the homepage. There's no phone number. There's no email address. There's no direct response form. There's no Calendly link. You have to go pawing through the site to find this. And the problem is that you do not know at what point someone will be triggered they reach the point where they know enough that I'm now ready. And so you don't know how they're going to enter your site, on which page they entered from Google. You don't know what page they're on or what they're reading. And any of those are a possibility. If they're not a possibility, what's it doing on your website? The point is that every single page at the top and at the bottom, you should have multiple different ways for someone to reach you. And the deal is, not everybody wants a meeting. And if that's the only option you give them, you're gonna have a lot of people who would otherwise buy who will go somewhere else. Some people want to pick up the phone. Some people want to send an email. Some people will fill out a form. Often on these direct response forms, I will generally put in a tick box at the end of the form to explicitly say, am I interested in the answer to a technical question, or do I want to talk to a sales rep? And the idea is that gets routed to different people with different responses back, because a lot of people will not fill that form out if it's not clear that they're going to be hounded by an SDR. If all they want is to try to answer a couple of questions, but they don't want to talk to someone, let them and make it very explicit that there's the low risk version of this form and the high risk version. You can, send a note to a technician or to a scientist, or send a note to a sales rep. And then the other thing is there are people who are ready to talk. So give them the option of setting up a meeting, give them a Calendly link. So the idea again is you don't give them what's convenient for you. You give them a range of options that represent the different levels of comfort with different communication styles that different buyers are going to have. And some people, there's old school people who just want to pick up the phone. There are people who just want to send an email. And then there are people who are ready to fill out a Calendly form and have a meeting. And that needs to be on every single page. You need to have it at the top and at the bottom. And generally what I'll do is phone number and email at the top on the very, very top bar of every single page. And then in the footer, have both a direct response form and an option to set up a meeting with something like a Calendly link.
I think for me, when I have all these different issues, they add up, and you can have a better product, but if your competition makes it easier for your customers to buy, they're going to eat your lunch.
Yeah.
And so you're the market leader and you can force customers into this type of process that suits your ideal business plan. That's great. Most of us don't live in that world. Most of us are in a situation where we need to compete against, other vendors. And there's some really easy wins here to be had.
Yeah. And again, the other thing that's important in this is this notion of satisficing, which is this idea from the psychology of consumer buying, which says people are unwilling to make the investment to determine what's the best option. They only want the option that's good enough. And what they're looking at is what's the minimum amount of effort it takes to reach good enough. And the more roadblocks you put up, the harder it is for your option to be the one that is good enough. It doesn't have to be the best. It just needs to be good enough and easy. And so there are different ways to compete on whether or not you have the best product. You can have the third best product, but the easiest product to buy, and you're going to beat the hell out of the competitors.
Yeah, it's that gas station that has, a lower price, and you need to make 3 left turns to get in there. It's not worth the extra nickel.
Yeah. Or the gas station where they won't tell you what the price is until you've already filled up your tank.
All right.
I think
Let's
that's
leave it there
today. So until next week.
All right, Dale.